Hello, I'm Tom Ferguson and welcome to The Fundamental Molecule. This show explores the intersection of water, technology, and entrepreneurship. Each week, I interview innovators, experts, entrepreneurs, and investors in the world of water, helping us understand where this trillion-dollar industry is headed. These are the stories of the people building the future of the world's most valuable and fundamental resource.
Disclaimer. Tom Ferguson is the managing partner of Virgin Island Ventures. All opinions expressed by Tom and podcast guests are solely their own opinions and do not reflect the opinions of Virgin Island Ventures. This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be viewed as investment advice or relied upon as a basis for investment decisions.
It's always worth listening to someone's why for doing something. What is their core motivation? Are they a tourist or are they here for the long haul? When you combine a compelling why with the right mix of technical brilliance, charisma, kindness, and energy, you get someone who looks and sounds a lot like Alan Adams. He is the founder and CEO of Aquatic Labs, who have made amazing strides in bringing lab chemistry into real time, eradicating one of the core monitoring problems that is profoundly bad in both water operations and ocean science. This is also the only conversation where the guest's idea of a misspent youth is teaching particle physics at MIT. He is genuinely amazing. Please enjoy my conversation with Alan Adams. Alan, thank you so much for being here. How are you today?
It's such a pleasure to be here. I'm doing great, actually. I've had a fairly exciting few weeks. So yeah, very excited to have this chat.
Yeah, exactly. Summer, there's always this sort of thing of like, oh yeah, summer's going to kind of wind down, like in whatever the VC industry sort of goes on holiday on August. And I'm like, kind of wish they would, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's certainly quite frenetic. I really appreciate you being here. I want to start us, not in the middle of things, but sort of underneath in the middle of things. We're going into the deep, which is going to be something that we haven't talked a lot about on this podcast, around the ocean side of things. Why did you choose oceans as the target of your energy? So that's the first one. We'll start there. And then the secondary thing to kind of process as you're going, what do you wish that people were more aware of?
Oh, wow. Specifically about the ocean.
Yes.
Oh, okay. This is an extraordinarily long story, which I'm going to try to trim down. Okay.
Fine by me. Yeah.
I was trained as a physicist. My misspent youth was spent on particle physics. And I spent many years teaching physics at MIT. This was my gig. But I had a side hobby in underwater photography. And I knew some high-speed imaging people at MIT, and I knew a bunch of underwater photographers, and I was like peanut butter and chocolate. And so we started doing high-speed underwater video. We did documentary work for like museums and aquariums and stuff. And that was just my weekend gig. It was fun. I was doing particle physics during the week and teaching, and then doing underwater photography in the weekend. And then in 2013, I spawned. My wife and I had a kid, and he's amazing. His name is Arthur. But before we found out she was pregnant, I had been invited on an expedition with the New England Aquarium to Fiji to say thank you for doing some photography for them. And Arthur was 2 weeks late. 2 weeks after he was born, I hopped on an airplane, flew to Fiji. God bless my wife. I mean, you can't even begin.
Ouch.
Yeah. Well, she's the one who forced me. So I went home when we found out she was having the baby. I went to work and I said, guys, I can't go. And everyone was very cool. I could totally understood. And I went back home that evening and said, just by the way, I'm not going on the trip to Fiji. And she said, what kind of a person are, we're not the kind of people who will quit. What kind of an idiot are you just because we're having a kid? So a month after his due date was the trip, and she was 2 weeks late, and then Arthur was born, and it was just life altering. And I was shocked. I had no idea how much of an impact that would have on me. 2 weeks later, I get on an airplane, weeping my way across the Pacific, end up in Fiji with a bunch of aquarists, get on a boat, and we're diving every day for 12 days. And it's the most spectacular soft corals you'll ever. Just glorious. Every night, as my head's bouncing on the bulkhead, all I can think is, by the time my newborn kid is old enough to see this, it will be gone. And by the time I got on the flight home, I was having a crisis of conscience. What am I doing studying particles, black holes, and the world's burning down around us? And I didn't know how to do what to do. But over the next couple of years, I totally switched my career. I stayed at MIT, left physics. I started a lab building ocean imaging systems and sensors, got a joint appointment at Woods Hole Oceanographic, and started building things because I had this kid whose inheritance was burning. And I felt, for the first time in my life, I felt a responsibility to do something like truly practical and impactful, this felt like the place I could do something really meaningful. It really was my kid's fault. So a coda to that, I thought it's been an interesting few weeks. Last week, my son, Arthur will turn 12 in about a month and a half. Last week, I took him on my first vacation in years, and we went, because I run a startup, so vacation is a notional.
Yeah, exactly. Become a bit unfamiliar.
It was fascinating. Yeah, and so I took him to Bonaire and trained him how to dive. And we went on our first dives together, and he's now my dive buddy. He's certified now. It was breathtaking because on the one hand, like it was totally coming full circle. I got into this for this. And there he is, falling in love with the fish, falling in love with the coral, chasing and just like doing all the things. And he's seeing it through the fresh eyes. And I'm seeing coral that are under the pressure of heat, acidification, stony coral wasting disease, the detritus and runoff and nutrients coming from the lawns and construction on the shore. And all of this, I'm seeing what's left and he's seeing what's new. And it was just, and I'm getting emotional. It was very intense because this was why I got into it. And it's still a huge, probably if anything, much worse than when he was born. And it's true. He's never going to see the corals that I saw. They're not the same. They will never be the same in my life. And the scope of that challenge is huge. It's global. It's diffuse. It's everywhere. And I guess what I would say is in answer to the question, what do I wish people understood? Climate change is an order one challenge to these ecosystems. But it's not just climate change. It's climate change. It's development. It's plastic pollution. It's a whole slew of things. And even if we magically stop the impact of carbon in the atmosphere, all these other pressures are also super hairy and consequential for the ecosystem. Understanding the way that if you live in a city and you buy plastic and you throw it in the water, that gets out into these rich ecosystems that feed our seafood, ecosystems, that feed the world's, carbon sequestering ecosystem of phytoplankton. If you live in Pensacola, if you live in Omaha, you are having a direct impact through your choices in your life on the ocean. And it may be diffuse and dilute, but it's very real, especially when there's 7 billion of you. And that sense of ownership and connection to the water, everything that lives in the water, and the way those things have a connection to you, that's what I wish people could feel about the ocean.
Absolutely. We had a kind of really interesting light bulb moment this week with the publication of that ProPublica article about the kind of global aridification of the section of the world, which kind of allowed human society to flourish. And this idea that we are emptying the groundwater of the world into the ocean. That essentially that's what we're doing, is that we're transferring what was underneath the ground into the oceans, and it's making the oceans much, much worse and rise much faster than anything that's happening with glaciers and polar ice cap. It was kind of a really interesting unlock for people, even for, somebody who spends all of their time around this stuff. I'm really interested in this idea of the light bulb. You don't get many people who sort of had their misspent uses teaching particle physics at MIT. But I think as a motivator to do anything at all, your one is really profound. I sometimes in my weaker moments find myself, because I went to grad school and people do all sorts of things, but they also do quite a lot of things that I think are inherently kind of meaningless and slightly pointless and possibly even just deleterious. And I find myself judging them. I'm curious, do you think more people should be guided by the same logic that you did? How do you talk to your students, or how have you talked to your students about this? How do you advise young people in terms of this really kind of profound choice that they have about what they choose to work on and kind of leaving the place better than you found it? Because once you see it, you can't unsee it, right? Once the pill's been taken. But an awful lot of people just sort of ignore it. And I find it very frustrating. What do you think?
Oh, that is such a fascinating question. And as a parent of 2 boys who are trying to find their way into meaning, this is something I've been thinking about a lot too. First off, if I could have a conversation with my former self at 26, thinking about what to do now that I've, finished grad school and I'm on my way out into the world, I would have said, do exactly what you're going to do. Follow where you think you can do something that's meaningful to you, because life is short. We're human. We follow the meaning that you can build. I don't hold anything against people who are doing something because they think awesome, it's valuable, it hit something that's just me that lands, right? There was a shift for me that was very personal and to me very meaningful, which not everyone has to have. That's okay. What I do wish I could tell my foremost self, and instill on the people around me, in which I try to do into my team and my students. And I still talk to a lot of my former grad students and postdocs, like, this is my circle. Be aware of the impact you have, right? There's this classical notion of conservatism that we have a contract with our communities, with our traditions, with the land, and we are obliged to treat it as it has been treated and gifted to us. And that's the people, that's the place, that's the physical ecosystem. And I wish that sense of responsibility, you don't have to study it. You don't have to like change your life because of it, but you should treat it with respect, and you should treat it with the grandeur that it has in your life, whether you pay attention or not. And that I wish I could instill in everyone. I don't need everyone to go out there and be an environmental activist, although rock on, like bring it on, but to respect the problem and our connection to these things, these places, these times. I'm not a religious person, but I care deeply about the religious tradition that my family moves in. I'm not a strongly political person, but I have very strong feelings about our responsibility to each other, to society, to the land, to the ecosystem. And those are the things that I think, I don't care what someone does for a living. There are going to be people doing everything. There's always someone doing something.
No, I think that's much more balanced than me. So it's really, I just think it's a really beautiful place for your work to have come from. So you decided that oceans is going to be the thing. Can you just walk us through the germination of the idea and the arc of what has kind of become Aquatic Labs? We're going to get into the kind of swings and roundabouts of the last, 18 to 24 months since we've been working together. But I'm really interested in the germination of the idea, where kind of the initial value proposition and product came from.
I mean, really, it was born of deep and profound frustration. By the late teens or early aughts, I was building fairly sophisticated instruments for sensing and sampling ocean water, environmental DNA sampling systems that go down 6,000 meters and collect environmental DNA from the water column, radiometers that measure.
Not to jump in, but why did you start there? Why was it that sampling systems was the thing that you decided on?
So there I was at Woods Hole helping to build instruments and stuff. And the way that works is the scientists come to the engineering team and say, like, I need to do this, build me this. And the engineer's like, well, okay,
got it.
We'll see what we can do. And then you build a thing, you're like, this is great, but 10 times faster and 10 times more precise, please. So, that's the standard.
10 times cheap.
And 10 times cheaper. Exactly. I'd like 40. But then no. Okay. So I was building these instruments, and I built these radiometers, and I won't go off about them. I'll just say that I love them. I care so deeply about these instruments. I've spent so much of my life on them, and anyone who wants to technically geek out about it, bring it. But I'll just say that there are these things, and we built 3. The total cost, if you integrate like all the people time and all the grant money, it's like millions of dollars went into these 3 instruments. They're phenomenal. They're awesome. And they're 3. They spend most of their time on a shelf. And I taught semiconductor physics. I understand the difference between what's possible with modern manufacturing methods, with scalable semiconductor manufacturing, is amazing. And what we do in the ocean for sensing is we build instruments like NASA built the space shuttle. We build 2 of them, 3 of them. It doesn't matter what they cost. They're going to go out on a ship that costs $100,000 a day to operate. No one cares what the instrument costs. Just build 2 of them, and then someone's going to use them, write a dissertation, and then the data and the instrument go on the shelf. I didn't get into this for publication. Publications are important, but that's, for me, that's no longer what I'm after. I wanted to impact, but we couldn't have impact because the scale of the ocean is not 2 or 3 data points. It's not 2 or 3 instruments. It's billions of data points and tens of hundreds of thousands, millions of instruments. And we're nowhere near what's needed. Even if you're just focused on industrial coastal requirements, like we just don't know what's happening anywhere. One of the key reasons is that the people who build the instruments build them like NASA built space shuttle. That's crazy. And over time, I wanted to be able to measure like pH and temperature and all these water properties every couple of meters along an entire coastline and see what we can see. And we know there's structure there. And I wanted to see that just on a purely scientific level. That was utterly impossible to do, not because we couldn't do it, but because no one's willing to build the instrument. No one's doing it. No one's actually building the instrument. And it's not how the culture of engineering for the ocean works. And I got so frustrated with the distance I saw between what we could build and what I could buy that I quit, right? I quit. I left the university. Dropped my appointment at Woods Hole, and I started Aquatic Labs. And I took some time in between to like blow all my money while I tried to figure out what I wanted to do, which was a terrible idea. So that's the entrepreneurial vision. Like, there's this thing.
I think that's cool.
Yes, there's something that hurts in the world. and no one's fixing it. And you just get angry at the universe. That was the transition for me. And boy, that's been a learning experience. But that's what we're here to do. We're here to build the instruments that I wanted, but that weren't there. And in particular, instruments that are strictly necessary to scaled industrial applications like carbon sequestration, like coastal monitoring of biodiversity. And also, by the way, for things like making water use on land more efficient by being able to measure the water more precisely. We want to bring for large industrial actors, we want to bring down their water use. We want to decrease their waste chemistry because they have more insight into their processed water and into the water in their cooling system. And it's the same tools for those two things. And these are scale problems where you need millions of the thing. So that's what we're here to build. And that's why.
I was going to ask you the very kind of like the dumb question, but I always think it's really helpful. But just in case you want to add anything to it, like, why is that data important? You just mentioned kind of like 4 or 5 use cases, but if you want to say anything else in that area, because I think it's, people always say, you can't manage what you don't measure. And like I'm just like, well, okay, maybe. But actually getting really granular about the breadth of the value of what your system provides, I think is really important to understand quite how compelling what you're building is. So if you want to just spend just a couple more minutes on that, but to give us an idea of where you're seeing this manifest.
Let me give you 2 examples. The first of which is a strictly industrial one. If you are cooling things with water by letting the water flow over it and then cool, it's really important that you're not in the process scaling up all of your equipment and pipes, right? You don't want to be depositing a bunch of calcium carbonate on your equipment and in your pipes. That causes all sorts of problems. To avoid that, as you run the water and it increases in concentration with all sorts of dissolved solids, you eventually just dump the water and start over. Now, if you know how close you are to problems happening, if you knew perfectly, you could keep using that water over and over and over again, right up until you get to boundary and then dump it. But if you can't see just how close you are to causing a disastrous scaling problem, then you throw it out a little early and you just use more water. And that doesn't sound like that big a deal, but it's a huge cost both to the companies and to the ecosystem to use a lot of water unnecessarily. And so being able to measure the saturation state, the amount, the probability that you're going to cause scaling with high precision in real time is really valuable to increasing your water efficiency and decreasing your waste.
Huge process impact.
Huge impact. And it does a beautiful thing, which if you could do that better, you are aligning the financial industrial incentives with good stewardship and good conservation practice. That's our mission. Make money by doing things that help. That's deeply what the company is here to do. So that's one example. And so our sensors, the sensors we've developed, take a measurement that traditionally involves laboratories and reagents and trained chemists, and it does it on the surface of a chip with no reagent. And it does it once a minute. That changes what is required to do the kinds of measurements. It just changes the economic landscape completely for that kind of efficiency. So there's a lot of use for that. On a social side, exactly the same technology lets us measure things like the alkalinity in the seawater. And that's important because one of the most valuable ways and one of the most sort of scientifically defensible ways to sequester carbon from the atmosphere is put it in the ocean as bicarbonate, which is what the atmosphere and the ocean do anyway. Most of the carbon that we put up over the industrial era have gone into the ocean, and it's inert. It's biologically neutral. It's great. The problem is it's invisible. And again, in order to measure it, you need to take a sample, send it to a lab, have a trained scientist run, an analysis using expensive equipment and reagents. If you're talking about billions of tons of carbon, which is what's relevant for climate, there just aren't enough chemists by a factor of 1,000 to do the work that would be required. And so being able to make a sensor that can measure this thing that traditionally is not measurable with a sensor completely changes the problem. All of a sudden, if you have a gold mine and you tell someone, I just got 100 tons of gold, I'll sell it to you at 10% less than market value. They say, oh, that's great. Where is it? Oh, well, it's invisible. Like, that's not going to work so well. But if you want to ask Mitsubishi, I'd like you to pay $10 billion for your carbon offsets. And they're like, where is it? Well, it's invisible. No.
It's invisible. But it's about this.
We're making it visible.
Yeah. Precision is going to be so important to this area of the carbon markets. And obviously, like, people, it's in, let's call it the trough of disillusionment at the moment, certainly in the US. But what's happening out there in the world? And we'll kind of get to this. I'm just curious, what do you miss about your previous life now that you're in startup land?
One thing that I totally predicted and one thing that I didn't. I miss teaching. I love teaching. I love teaching, watching a room full of people, watching their, like, one by one, they go, with understanding, and you just like popcorn in the room. It's amazing. And I miss that. That's like walking through the things that you love, the ideas that you love, and sharing them with people. It's just so much fun. I get to do that some. I have an amazing team. The team here is amazing. I cannot believe how cool the people I get to work with are. But that's not my job. My job is mostly all the other stuff of being an entrepreneur. So I miss that. I miss the teaching. The other thing that I really miss is I didn't appreciate how much I would miss this. Walking down the hall and going to a seminar or going to a colloquium or just chatting with a friend over lunch about 1,000 different topics. In academia, you get to do that, right? Like I want to learn something about chemistry or I want to learn some biology or whatever. I just go to some random thing and I'm exposed to all these different kinds of ideas and kinds of reasoning. When I was on faculty, I took a course in documentary filmmaking. It was freaking amazing. And you can. And that led to a lifelong friendship and all sorts of things and whatever. It was really impactful for me. And I don't have that now in the same way. And so the narrowness of the technical focus is totally awesome because there's stuff that we're doing that's going to be in chemistry textbooks someday. It's totally off. But it's only going to be in chemistry textbooks. And I don't get to talk to the biologists or the Slavic studies scholars or the mathematicians or whatever, who would normally be the people I would graze with over lunch, right? And so I miss that too. But otherwise, like almost everything else, I loved it.
It's such an interesting idea, actually, because it's one of these things that entrepreneurs should really try and do is to kind of maximize their exposure to ideas from other sectors. Because like something that can be furiously unoriginal in one area can look awfully original in yours. Because I haven't thought about it. This is great kind of like Charlie Munger idea that there are 300 areas of sort of disciplines out there in the world. There are usually 2 or 3 ideas in each of them that carry about 80% of the freight. And if you can learn all, call it 600 to 900 of those ideas, you're actually in a really, really interesting position to be in possession of some quite interesting wisdom. Like, it sounds like you really kind of understand that logic. Is there any way, do you have any advice for entrepreneurs beyond just kind of stay curious and all the rest of it? Is there any way in which you can maintain that, meet someone in the sort of the halls of the building or go and attend a seminar like that logic? Is there any way that you can replicate that as a founder?
I would love advice from anyone on good ways to do that. I will say that I've gone to some lengths to be part of like reading groups and discussion groups and policy groups on things that are not my expertise, just to hold on to that. And so that's a really important part of my life, in parallel with the work, not disconnected from, right? It's adjacent. I think it's really hard. I mean, look, there are many different parts that go into being an entrepreneur as I'm learning. One thing is that there are phases where you just have to be the operator with your head down and doing the thing, right? While you're in a fundraise, you're not doing anything else. You're not trying to learn some Slavic studies. You're not reading a history book. You're just knocking it out of the park. And so like the bandwidth limitations are just so constraining and so demanding. So it's hard. I don't know. I don't have a good answer to that.
Yeah, it's just an interesting one, but like I can see that would be something that would be quite tricky. So multivariate real-time sensor, can you tell us exactly from your perspective, what is I don't know whether kind of like economic debt weight loss to the economy, but can you just explain to people who are listening the degree to which the existing lab system is an impediment to so many things? The reason I ask is it's something that comes up over and over again. And multivariate kind of real-time sensing is definitely, it's why we're here, right? It's why we work with you. We really think it's one of the great unlocks that's potentially there. But at the core of it is this invisible tax in terms of time, efficiency, cycle time of experiment, that it kind of gets sucked up because everybody kind of runs into the same bottleneck, which is you've got to process it through a legacy lab, which have problems. And I'm just curious as to how you appraise those problems, how you think about it. What is it that you're kind of fighting against?
Oh, this is such a huge and wonderful topic, and I really enjoy this question. Let me give you 2 kinds of answers. If you're trying to make a process, let's just focus industrially for the moment, but this broadly. If you want to make a process more efficient, you need to be monitoring it and then making little adjustments and keeping it as efficient as you can. And that's great. Like that's how all control loops in all systems do some version of monitor, change. If the process of going from you do the measurement and then you get the answer that's actionable takes a week, it's like trying to run a factory with your arms tied behind your back. You can't do that. If that was in your car, you use your eyes. A week later, you get a response.
And your legs and shut inside a concrete box.
Yeah, that will never work. And so the degree of efficiency you can achieve is limited by the speed with which you can get a feedback. Now, there's something, you don't need millisecond response for a lot of things, but not having it be monthly is pretty important for anything that happens on a real-time basis. In water, a huge amount. Like it's so easy for people to think water is invisible. It's very simple. It's not that complicated. It's unbelievably complicated as chemistry. What that means is that in order to get an answer to almost any question you deeply care about, you need to grab a sample of water and send it to someone who knows what they're doing. And then they process it. But probably a lot of people want them to process it and tell them what's going on in their water. And there's a backlog and there's shipping and there's all sorts of the whole thing, which means that getting that kind of information into a control loop to make things more efficient is rarely done. Usually what you do is you say, well, I'm just going to make some approximation like this. The temperature goes up, probably the pH went up or went down as well, which is what depends on your system. And they're correlate. The correlations between pH and conductivity and temperature and all. So you use some proxy and you do a reasonably good job. But if you could just magically know, you could be a lot more efficient. Think about all the places water is used in processes in the world. Cool buildings. Every big building around you has a cooling tower. That's water process. All of the municipal water processes that clean water, filter water, transport, all of them have control loops. In all of them, if you run up against one of these hard chemistry problems as part of your optimization, and you have to ship it to a lab, like done, you're not going to use it. You lose efficiency. And that means that virtually every large water problem has an efficiency problem that's limited by the fact that interesting measurements tend to be very expensive and slow because you have to ship it to a lab. And anywhere where you can take that lab out of the loop and just put a sensor in that tells you immediately what's going on is an opportunity for order one efficiency gain across a whole spectrum of industry. Doesn't mean it's easy to do overnight. Doesn't mean that it'll automatically get adopted. And it certainly doesn't solve the business problem. But on a purely technical level, that's what's going on. It's being able to see what's happening in real time enough to be able to act with that knowledge, make things more efficient. And that's deeply what we're here to do.
So let's take this into kind of the commercialization of what you've built. You obviously have like an extraordinary story of an inspiration and a kind of an aggressively accurate understanding of the value proposition that needs to be provided. And then you're kind of transposing the product that you've built to deliver this value proposition onto what's turned out to be a few different markets. So very kind of broad opportunity for you to talk about the experience of the last, I guess, I don't know, just pick a random number, 9 to 10 months. Pick a random number. Can you just talk us through your experience of kind of what happened from the explosion in confidence in your initial target market in the IRA to then kind of the inevitable kind of like hitting kind of reality and people kind of figuring out what's happening with offsets, and then obviously the change in administration and those. Can you just walk us through that arc? But I'm really interested in how it felt for you. Obviously, that like what happened and when, and like what it was like to actually go on that ride, because you experienced it in a way that I think, I mean, obviously others, but not that many within the kind of Burnt Island group sort of did. I'd be fascinated to hear your reflections.
I will say this has been an unbelievable roller coaster ride, and over has felt like getting hit by a ton of brick. It's been intense. So let me talk through that real quick. So first off, for context, I came from the oceanographic community. One of our base assumptions was that the oceanographic community, regulatory monitoring, the universities, researchers, and NOAA would be a key early adopter market. We know these people. I can call them on the telephone. I know who they are. And so like, this is perfect. And I know their pain. I understand what they, some degree, what they want and what kind of things would sell, what kind of price points. Like there was some familiarity with that. Meanwhile, there are a number of technical things we care about that are classic problems in the field that people would really love to see fixed. So we really thought that our first truly forgiving, curious, expectant beachhead markets would be
quality beachhead market.
Right, exactly. So we plan to release a lot of things in the winter and spring of 2025. And then the election happened, and we're sitting there from a distance last summer and last fall watching. And God bless Christine at Burnt Island, by the way, who was just wonderful all the way along, poking us and prodding us to do this faster. But we were sitting there watching, going like, I don't know what's going to happen. This is a little scary. And started a process to pivot well before the election, well before the change of administration, to figure out which are the other markets we're going to go after next. This was very, very important that we had started the process of, other than oceanography and related regulatory markets and CDR and carbon sequestration, other than those, who's next? And who are the industrial customers that are not complicated by government funding, that are not complicated by policy, but who are going to exist regardless of what the political landscape is? Who are those folks, and how do we solve their problem? And this is, by the way, a classic mistake for startups is you have a widget and you're trying to find someone who wants your widget. the classic advice is go find someone with a pain point and build a thing for them. But we built a thing and we're like, oh, shoot, we need to find the person with the pain. Like, that's exactly what we were not supposed to do. And now I understand very well why.
Yeah, exactly.
And it hurt. So we start this process of going out and calling all sorts of people. We had all these ideas about these people would love it and those people would love it. And we had a couple of things that were like, no one, like, this is a total red herring, but whatever, we'll look at pools and various other things. And we started getting some clarity. And by the spring, we had a pretty clear picture of what were the first 3 market segments we wanted to go after. Really, what are the 2 that are the most key ones? We started getting some pull. The election came, and oh my God, within months, we were having telephone calls like this. Hey, Alan, says the government funded researcher at a government institution. Hey, Alan, we've been talking about this project for a year and a half. We finally got signatures all the way up to the secretary of our department. It's confirmed. The problem is I no longer have a bank account and my credit card has a $1 spending limit. Also, I'm probably getting fired on Friday. Do you have any job opening? That's not the kind of conversation you want to have with a customer, right? Everything about that is bad. I don't want anyone to be under the impression that I'm feeling like, oh, woe is me. Like, we're in a bad situation. Like, everyone's in a bad situation. This is a horrible place. But strictly from the local, like, we're in the best place because we're not under that gun directly. That's not our only option. So my friends who are still in the academic and oceanographic, like, they were getting, like, it's just been horrible.
Absolutely.
The whole community is just decimated. From our point of view, though, just speaking with my startup founder hat on and operator hat on, like, that market's gone. Thank God we had been exploring and pivoting into the industrial sector to get some insurance. And what happened over the past 6 months has been a breathtaking roller coaster, but also it's starting to really move. So we're getting inbound daily in the market segments that we're most excited about. We're like, everyone we call is like, oh yeah, we want to pilot. And that is such a good place to be. And after all of this arc of everything, like, we're just starting to feel that pull. I won't say we've hit product market fit or anything, but we're just like, the smell is in the air.
You're starting to feel the tongue. It's a really remarkable job you've done. I've got to say, what have you learned about sales since you started doing this? Everyone
will say they want it until they have to pay $1. That has been so shocking to me. This is true, whether it's selling to customers or selling to investors. Like, people will be like, oh, tell me more. Oh, yeah, I would love that. But then when you're like, okay, well, here's a price point and here's a contract. What do you think? And they're like, well, that's really interesting. We'll think about that. That's so frustrating. And I didn't see that coming. So for me, that may be very idiosyncratic. Like, I came from an academic.
It's a tough one.
That's tough.
Yeah.
The other thing is that, like, it's so easy to let things take time. I've been very, very slow to appreciate the importance of just making quick decisions and executing quickly. And in sales, this is so painful because it's just so crucial to size up quickly and be like, oh, that's not going to be good for us. That's not going to go through. And I've been crap at that. I've been like, I really need to learn how to be better at that. That's one of the things I'm finding really difficult. And thank God for the people on the team who are not so bad at it. But, as a founder, like, I'm pretty important in a lot of those conversations.
I know firsthand that you're actually pretty remarkable at it. Well, one of the things I think is really interesting as a founder for you is that you've got such a unique, motivating position. You've got this extraordinary energy and ability to communicate, which directly feeds into, I know you're being modest, but I know exactly how strong a salesperson you are. But what you have is so, and I use this word carefully, is relatively unique. How are you finding the process of transferring or instilling in your company and team your degree of enthusiasm and belief? Or is it just a hiring problem? Because if you can do that and really transmit what you're transmitting in this conversation, I think Aquatic Labs is not a company that I would want to compete against. In fact, it already is I want to compete against. I'm really interested as to how someone like you who has this edge tries to institutionalize it. You may not have thought about it, but I think you probably have.
I've thought about it a little bit, and I've thought about it much more sort of like in retrospect than in prospect at this point. Look, not to put too fine a point on it, everyone at this company could be making a lot more money working at Google. In fact, some people in the company left jobs where they were making a lot more money and came here because they believe in what we're doing. When we went and looked for adjacent markets outside of carbon sequestration and outside of oceanographic research, one of the criteria were, not from government funding, that it's not regulatorily dependent, that it has independent economic streams, all those things. But also, it had to be aligned with our values. It had to be that if we do our job well, they will make money and they will be more efficient in their water use. And there will be an alignment between economic incentives and good stewardship, because I will lose everyone on the team the minute we don't do that, including myself. I don't need to teach them that. They know that. Everyone on the team is, in that sense, like a deep believer. And it is just awesome to see what that does. Having said that, that's not the same as like the storytelling, right? And the storytelling process itself is a different thing. And that really is much more about who's in the room, what they know, et cetera. And I have not done as much thinking about how to do that. I will add, though, that when it comes to talking to investors, when it comes to talking to engineers at some level and technical people, that level of communicative, and CEOs for that matter, that level of communicative oomph and energy goes a very long way to getting doors open. But for signing the damn contract, it's really about what happened in the trial. What do the data look like and what do the dollars look like? So that transition, it's really fun actually for me to be watching the company go from needing me to be in those conversations to not needing me to be in those conversations. Like itself, once you get the door open and once people see what the value is, I see the beginnings of that's going to be its own thing.
We're moving into that next stage. It's funny, it reminding me of this, like, of this really interesting sort of visual dual archetypes, is that somebody who is on the edge of learning sales, like there's this vision of 100 boxes and inside there are 3 muffins or whatever, but there are 97 boxes with nothing inside. Like the born salesperson just hurls themselves into the middle of the boxes and tears them all to pieces as fast as they possibly can and doesn't care about all the ones they find that have no muffin in them, because then they just really quickly get to the one with the muffin in it. But the person who's learning sales just kind of really wants there to be a muffin and opens one and then is scared of the next one because it hasn't, it might not have a muffin in it, but they like once it's still closed or you're kind of moving it around or shaking it or whatever, you're preserving the optionality of there potentially still being a muffin in there, rather than just like shortening shortening the life cycle of finding out like whether or not there's lots of the word muffin a lot, a way that I don't usually do.
Tom, I feel seen.
It's crazy, isn't it? And honestly, like I still find myself falling foul of it in the fundraising side of things, just on the LP, which is like, as long as they're there, I haven't actually got like, just go almost like for the no, try and qualify people out. It's really interesting, hard to learn. And it's really great you've got to the point you're kind of like inculcating it in others. I want you to cast your mind forward a little bit. Can you just talk a little bit about the big version of Aquatic Lambs? When this becomes everything that it could be, what does that look like? Like, what's the breadth of impact? And what kind of change do you think that you're enacting? And then I want to just take you to the carbon markets for a second.
First off, underlying mission, alignment of financial incentives for industrial actors with good stewardship and responsible action. And I see that playing out like spades. We're already starting to have impact that's going to grow. I want Aquatic to be the default answer to the question, I'm doing something in water and I want to know the state of that water so I can do it better. I want us to be the default answer to the question, how do I know what's going on in my water, wherever it is? I want that to be in the ocean. I want that to be in rivers. I want that to be in processed water. And the reason is not that I think other people aren't doing great work in sensing and other people aren't doing great. Like there's all sorts of great stuff out there. But what hasn't been done the way I see it being possible is doing it radically at scale. Look, in a factory on land, there are temperature sensors scattered around like candy, because if you see that it's getting a little warm over here on the ground, that's because the pulley above it is starting to wear out, and 3 months from now, it's going to fail. And then that'd be $100,000 of a day's loss of productivity or millions of dollars. So instead, you see that, you're like, oh, the pulley, right? And you schedule maintenance and you have it replaced. And then you just saved yourself a crap ton of money with tiny commoditized thermal sensors. Why would you not put them everywhere? And we don't do that in water. It's crazy. And there's so many things we could learn and act upon. And I want to enable that. I want the success for Aquatic would be to be in every water stream and say, we're telling you that pulley is going to fail. That aquaculture farm is going to run into this problem next week, et cetera. And that's a sensing at scale problem. The second thing that it does is temperature sensors are so commoditized that they're everywhere now. Right? They're on every PCB. Like you just monitor the temperature of everything. In the ocean, there are things that we want to do in the ocean, like carbon sequestration into the ocean. There are things that need to be happening in the ocean. Biology monitoring, biodiversity monitoring in the ocean, all sorts of things that really matter that can't be measured or seen right now because the tools are unbelievably expensive. They're boutique, they're built by hand, they're one-off. And we need commoditized sensors for that. Those markets both don't exist and are not really gigantically financially viable for the next few years. measuring carbon, measuring the carbon state of water, measuring the alkalinity of water. These are unlocks for a bunch of industries, including carbon sequestration in the ocean. By working in industrial water on land, we are allowing the commoditization of the underlying sensing technology and capabilities so that once those carbon sequestration markets are there, we will have the glove up to catch the ball and enable large-scale monitoring of exactly those things. And we're never going to get there if we just sit here and say, if only there was a carbon tax. The way we get there is by going out and making a lot of money for a lot of industrial actors, by helping them do things better, commoditizing our tools, and then being ready when the carbon markets are there.
It's one of the most compelling kind of pieces of logic. It's one of the difficulties on the kind of the impact side of things, because we are absolutely adamant that a lot of our impact is going to manifest when the Burnt Islanders have hit scale and driven their unit economics down. And as a result, are going to be ready for the markets that kind of the impact investors wishing we were going for first. And it's like, no. Like, whether it's Mahindra or Samsung or like whatever it is, you start small and you sell to the people who are going to buy, serial numbers 1 to 1,000. And then as you get to 1,000, your cost can go down and you can follow that pathway into the markets that you're going to be going to. You mentioned carbon sequestration. Everybody thinks that it's a mess. Microsoft keeps on buying lots of it. It's not as if the EU is slowing down. If anything, they've started, but not a lot of people in water think about carbon market. What is your point of view on where we are in terms of carbon sequestration? Because you're going to be integral to monitoring, reporting, and verification, specifically, obviously, from ocean sequestration. How would you appraise the state of the market? Obviously, it's not great in the US now, but where do you see it?
No, it's not great in the US. It's fairly abysmal. Although I will, look, we get very focused on like there is political will to do good things on all sides of the aisle in the US. It is surprising, but it is true.
Especially around water.
Yeah, especially around water. And so I think people, it's easy to get caught up in what is actually a horrible situation politically, fail to take the time to find the places where there are good threads too. And there are some really good threads with carbon and there are some really good threads with water. They're not what we would have hoped 5 years ago, but it's not. Sitting back and crying would be a mistake right now. In the center of the carnage, there's also a lot of opportunity. Having said that, it's not a great time to be a climate tech startup trying to do carbon sequestration in the ocean in the US. But in Canada, they're moving ahead really fast. In Europe, in Southeast Asia, in Australia, like in Africa, things are really moving. Whether that's on land with enhanced rock weathering in farmers' fields, or in rivers with river restoration and having carbon sequestration through river restoration, or whether that's in the ocean directly through carbon sequestration through coastal modifications. Like there are many, 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 many pathways to get carbon out of the atmosphere and locked into seawater in a way that's biologically safe. That's a decadal scale problem. That's a 20-year problem. It's not, these are gigaton problems. These are not problems that come and go, and they're not solutions that come and go over the course of a year or two. Startups do, but the industry and the solutions don't. And so this is a long game. It's a long play. And I see a huge amount of potential for it.
Me too. I always think there's something really, really interesting about knowing clearly when you're in the trough of disillusionment, really knowing that you're there. Because that very perversely is exactly the time that you should be acting and laying the groundwork for when people are like, oh, actually, well, no, we still need to do this. Okay, let's carry it on. That's where the advantage is built. And I think you've done absolutely extraordinary job putting yourself in a fairly spectacular strategic position. So our last question we ask all of our guests, if you had to choose one piece of advice for current and future water entrepreneurs, what would that be?
Like ask me who my favorite child is. I'm going to make it slightly more specific for folks who come from a technical background in ocean. And this is the bit of advice that I actually heard from a lot of people in a variety of ways, but it didn't land. I had to go through it. And I wish there had been some way for me to understand it. The hard parts of running a startup in the water sector as much as anywhere else, they're not the technical problem. The technical challenges, and we've done some freaking technical and sophisticated stuff. Like I'm very proud of our surface chemistry. I'm very proud of our semiconductor physics. I'm very proud of our analytic chemistry. Like there's a lot of really interesting technical stuff. The company doesn't live and die through technical risk. The company lives and die through market risk, market understanding pain points and what people are willing to pay and whether you can solve them. I built a team that was initially so over-focused on engineering and technical risk that I elided the much more significant and much more risky operational and business risk. And that is such an easy mistake to make. And it's a classic mistake. But that's the bit of advice I would give to absolutely every single person I talk to who came from anything like a background I did of like an academic or a technical background starting a company like this. The water industry is hard. People have been doing this for a long time, thousands of years. It's not like you're waltzing into a new place where you can just la-di-da do things. There's culture, there's history, there's tradition, and all those things have to be fought with and against. And it's not the technical things that will kill you. It could be, but that's your fault. But it's the business stuff that's much harder and much more complicated, much more about humans and history and chance. And that's what I wish I had understood.
That is a spectacularly good answer. And I kind of want to, put it behind a plane and fly it around, an electric plane, and fly it around so that everybody can see it. But it's also really characteristic. One of the things that like all of the partnership and everybody comes into is that the transition from the academic environment into the commercial environment is really hard. It's really hard. And you've just put your finger on why it's really difficult in such an eloquent way. But it has been so much fun watching you make that transition with the degree of care and energy and insight and understanding and excitement that you have. I'm so jacked about the idea of Aquatic Labs getting as big as we think it will and solving the amount of problems that we think it will. But, specifically excited for you to be entering the next stages of this journey just as an entrepreneur, but somebody more importantly who's really trying to solve something that really is worth solving. So all of us really applaud you.
Thank you so much for saying that, Tom. I really appreciate it. And you guys have been just amazing in helping us get here, and I'm looking forward to the future.
Well, we're just trying to keep up. That's what we're trying to do. Seriously, thank you so much for being a guest on The Fundamental Molecule, and I can't wait for the next time that we speak next. Thanks so much for being here.
I'm looking forward to it. Thanks so much, Tom.